Chapter 16. How the Beast Folk Taste Blood. My inexperience as a rider betrays me, and I wander from the thread of my story. After I had breakfasted with Montgomery, he took me across the island to the sea of Moreau, and a source of a hot spring into whose scalding waters I blundered in my previous day. Both of us carried whips and loaded revolvers, while going through a leafy jungle on our road thither, and we heard a rabbit squealing. We stopped and listened, but we heard no more, and presently we went on our way. The incident dropped out of our minds. Montgomery called my attention to a certain little pink animals with long hind legs, and we went leaping through the undergrowth. He told me that they were creatures made of offspring of the beast people that Moreau had invented. He fancied that they might serve for meat, but rabbit-like habit devouring of their young had defeated this intention. I had already encountered some of these creatures, once during my moonlight flight from the leopard man, and once during my pursuit by Moreau the previous day. By chance, one hopping to avoid us leapt into the hole caused by the uprooting wind-blown tree. Before it could extricate itself, and we managed to catch it. It spat like a cat, scratched and kicked vigorously behind with its hind legs, and made an attempt to bite, but its teeth were too feeble to inflict more than a painless pinch. It seemed to me rather a petty little creature, and as Montgomery stated, it would never destroy the turf by burrowing. It was very cleanly in its habits. I should imagine it might prove a convenient substitute for the common rabbit in gentlemen's parks. So we also saw on our way the trunk of the tree barked and the long strips, the splintered deeply. Montgomery called my attention to this. Not to claw bark of trees, that this is the law, he said. Much of some of them care for it. It was after this, I think, that we met Satyr and the Ape-Man. The Satyr of the gleam classical memory of the part of Moreau, and the face of ovine expression, like a coarser Hebrew type. His voice a harsh bleat, his nether extremities satanic. He was gnawing at the husk of a pod-like fruit as he passed us. Both of them saluted Montgomery. "Hail," they said, "to the other of the whip." There's the third with a whip now, said Montgomery. "So you better mind. Was he not made?" said the Ape-Man. He said he was made. The Satyr man looked curiously at me. The third of the whip, he was that sweeping into the sea. He has a thin white face. He has a thin long whip, said Montgomery. "Yesterday he bled and wept," said the Satyr. "You never bled nor wept. The master does not bleed or weep." "Ollendorfian beggar," said Montgomery. "You'll bleed and weep if you don't look out. He has 5 fingers. He is a 5 man like me," said the Ape-Man. "Come along, Prendrick," said Montgomery, taking my arm, and I went on with him. The Satyr and Ape-Man stood watching us, making our remarks to each other. "He says nothing," said Satyr. "Men have voices. Yesterday he asked me of things to eat," said the Ape-Man. "He did not know. Then they spoke in inaudible things. I had heard the Satyr laughing. And it was on our way back that we had came upon the dead rabbit, the dead body of the wretched little beast that was rent into pieces. Many of the ribs stripped white, the backbone indisputably gnawed, and at that Montgomery stopped. "Good God!" he said, stooping down and picking some of the crushed vertebrae to examine more closely. Good God, he repeated. What could this mean? Some carnivore of yours has remembered its old habits, I said after a pause. This backbone has been bitten through. He stood staring, with his white face and his lip pulled askew. I don't like this, he said slowly. I saw something of the same kind, I said, the first day I came here. The devil you did! What was it? A rabbit with its head twisted off. The day you came here? The day I came here. In the undergrowth at the back of the enclosure when I went out in the evening, its head was completely wrung off. I gave a long, low whistle. And what is more, I have an idea of which of your brutes did the thing. It's only a suspicion, you know. Before I came on the rabbit, I saw one of your monsters drinking from the stream. Sucking his drink? Yes. You do not suck your drink. That is the law. Much of the brutes care for the law, eh? Not Moreau. Not when Moreau's about. It was a brute who chased me. Of course, said Montgomery. It's just the way with carnivores. They kill, they drink. It's the taste of blood, you know. What's the brute like? He continued. Do you know him again? He glanced about us, standing astride over the mess of the dead rabbit, his eyes roving among the shadows screens of the greenery, and lurking places of ambuscades of forest and bonded us. The taste of blood, he said again. He took out his revolver and examined the cartridges and replaced it again. Then he began dropping his lip. I think I should know this brute again, I said. I stunned him. I ought to have a handsome bruise on this forehead of him. But then we have to prove that he killed the rabbit, said Montgomery. I wish I'd never had brought the things here. I should have gone on, but I stayed there thinking over the mangled rabbit in a puzzle-headed way. As it is, I went to such a distance that the rabbit's remains were hidden. Come on, I said. Presently, he woke up and came towards us. You see, he said, almost in a whisper, they are all supposed to have a fixed idea against eating anything that runs on land. If some brutes has by accident tasted blood, then we went on some way in silence. I wonder what can have happened, he said to himself. Then after a pause again, I did a foolish thing the other day. A servant of mine, I showed him how to skin and cook a rabbit. It's odd. I saw him licking hands. It never occurred to me. Then we must put a stop to this. I must tell Moreau. He could think of nothing else on our homeward journey. Moreau took the matter even more seriously than Montgomery, and I'm scarcely say that I was affected by their evident consternation. We must take an example, said Moreau. I have no doubt in my mind that the leopard man was the sinner, but how can we prove it? I wish, Montgomery, that you had kept your taste for meat in hand and gone out without exciting novelties. We may find ourselves in a mess yet, though I was a silly ass, said Montgomery, but the thing's done now, and you must, and I said I might have them, you know. We must see the thing at once, said Moreau. I suppose if anything should turn up, Maling shall take care of it. I am not so sure of Maling, said Montgomery. I think I ought to know him. In the afternoon, Moreau, Montgomery, myself, and Maling went across the island and the huts in the ravine. We three were armed. Maling carried a little hatchet. He used some chopping firewood and some coils of wire. Moreau had a huge cowherd's horn slugger and over his shoulder. You will see a gathering of the beast people, said Montgomery. It's a pretty sight. Moreau did not say a word on the way, but the expression of his heavy, white-fringed face was grimly set. Ah, said Moreau, letting a curved instrument fall to his side again. Immediately, there was a crash crashing through the yellow canes. The sound of the voices from the dense green jungle that marked the morass through which I had run through the previous day. Then, at 3 or 4 points on the edge of the sulphurous area, appeared the grotesque forms of the beast people hurrying towards us. I could not help a creeping horror as I perceived the first one, then another trot out from the trees or reeds from the shambling along over the hot dust. But Moreau and Montgomery stood calmly enough, and for force I stuck beside them. First to arrive was the satyr, strangely unreal for all that he cast a shadow and tossed the dust from his hoofs. After him a brake of monstrous lout, a thing of horse rhinoceros chewing a straw as it came, and appeared the swine woman, 2 wolf women, and fox bear witch, with her red eyes and her peaked face, and then others, all hurrying eagerly. As they came forward, and they began to cringe towards Moreau's chant, quite regardless of one another. Fragments of the latter half of litany of the law. His is the hand of the wound that wounds, his is the hand that heals, and so forth. As soon as they approached within a distance of perhaps 30 yards, they halted, and bowing on their knees and elbows, began to fling the white dust upon their heads. Imagine the scene if you can. We 3 blue-clad men, and with our misshapen black-faced attendant, standing a wide expanse in sunlit yellow dust under the blazing blue sky, and surrounded by the circle of crouching and gesticulating monstrosities, some almost human, save subtle expression gestures, some like cripples, and some so strangely distorted that as to resemble nothing of the denizens of our wildest dreams. And beyond the reedy lines of a canebrake in one direction, a dense tangle of palm trees on the other, separating us from a ravine with the huts, and to the north, the lazy horizon of the Pacific Ocean. 62, 63, counted Moreau. There are 4 more. I do not see the leopard man, I said. Presently, Moreau sounded the great horn again, and at the sound of it all, the beast people writhed and growled, grovelled in the dust. Then, slinking out of the canebrake, stooping near the ground, trying to join the dust-throwing circle behind Moreau's back, came the leopard man, the last of the beast people to arrive was the little ape man. The earlier animals, hot and weary with the groveling, and shot vicious glances at him. "Seize," said Moreau in his firm, loud voice, and the beast people sat back upon their arms and rested with their worshipping. "Where is the sayer of the law?" said Moreau, and the hairy gray monster bowed his face in the dust. "Say the words," said Moreau. Forthwith all the kneeling assembly swang from side to side and dashing up the sulphur in their hands. First the right hand and a puff of dust in the left. Again began once more to chant the strange litany. And when they had reached, "Not to eat flesh, that is the law," Moreau held up his lank white hand. "Stop!" he cried. And there fell absolute silence upon them all. I think they all knew and dreaded what was coming. I looked around the strange faces. When I saw in wincing attitudes and fruitive, dead bright eyes, I wondered that I had ever believed them to be men. "That law has been broken," said Moreau. "None escape, and none from the faceless creature of the silvery hair. None escape," repeated the kneeling circle of the beast people. "Who is he?" cried Moreau, and looked around the faces, cracking his whip. I fancied the hyena swine looked dejected, and so too did the leopard man. Moreau stopped, facing this creature, who cringed towards him in the memory of dread and infinite torment. "Who is he?" repeated Moreau in a voice of thunder. "Evil is he who breaks the law," chanted the sayer of the law. Moreau looked into the eyes of the leopard man and seemed to be dragging the very soul out of the creature. "Look, who breaks the law?" said Moreau, taking his eyes off the victim and turning it towards us. It seemed to me that there was a touch of exultation in his voice. "Goes back to the house of pain. They all clamored. "Goes back to the house of pain, O master! Go back to the house of pain! Back to the house of pain!" gabbled the ape-man as though the idea was sweet to him. "Do you hear?" said Moreau, turning back to the criminal. "My friend, hello!" For the leopard man, released from Moreau's eyes, had risen straight from the knees, and now, with eyes of flame and a huge feline tusk flashing out from under his curling lips, leapt towards his tormentor. I am convinced now that only the madness of unendurable fear could have prompted this attack. The whole circle of threescore monsters seemed to rise about us. I drew my revolver. The two figures collided. I saw Moreau reeling back the leopard man's blow. There was a furious yelling and howling all about us. Every one was moving rapidly. For a moment, I thought I was in a general revolt. The furious face of the leopard man flashed by mine, with Maling close in pursuit. I saw the yellow eyes of the hyena swine blazing with excitement, his attitude as if he were half resolved to attack me. The satyr, too, glared over at me over the hyena swine's hunched shoulders. I heard the crack of Moreau's pistol and saw the pink flash of dart across the tumult. The whole crowd seemed to swing round the direction of the glint fire. I, too, was swung around by the magnetism of the movement. In another second I was running, one of the tumultuous shouting crowd, the pursuit of the escaping leopard man. Oh, that was all that I can tell definitely. I saw the leopard man strike Moreau, and then everything spun around me until I was heading headlong. Maling was ahead, close in pursuit of the fugitive. Behind, their tongues already lolling out, ran the wolf women in great leaping strides. The swine folk followed, squealing with excitement, and the two bull men with their swathings of white. Then came Moreau and a cluster of beast people, his wide-brimmed straw hat blown off, his revolver in hand, his lank white hair streaming out. The hyena swine ran beside me, keeping pace with me and glancing furtively at me and out of his feline eyes, and the others came pattering out, shouting behind us. The leopard man went bursting his way through the long canes, which sprang back as he passed. The rattled in Maling's face. We others in the rear found a trampled path for us when we reached the break. The chase lay through the break for perhaps a quarter of a mile, and then plunged into a dense thicket, which retarded our movements exceedingly. We went through the crowd together, fronds flicking into our faces, ropey creepers catching us under the chin and gripping our ankles, thorny plant hooking into the tearing cloth and flesh together. "He has gone on all fours through this," planted Moreau, and now just ahead of me. "None escape," said Wolf Bear, laughing into my face with exultation of hunting. We burst out again among the rocks, and saw the quarry ahead running lightly on all fours and snarling at us over his shoulder. At the wolf folks howled with delight. The thing was still clothed, and at the distance the face still seemed human, but the carriage of its four limbs was feline, and the furtive droop of shoulder was distinctly that of a hunted animal. It leaped over some thorny yellow flowering bushes. It was hidden. Maling was halfway across space. At last the fury of the hunt slackened. We had pinned the wretched brute to a corner of the island. Moreau, whip in hand, marshaled us all into a regular line, and we advanced now slowly, shouting to one another as we advanced and tightening the cordon about our victim. He lurked noiseless and invisible in the bushes through which I had run from the during midnight pursuit. "Steady!" cried Moreau. "Steady!" as the lines of the Ends of the line crept around the tangle and the undergrowth and the hemmed and the brood in. Where a rush, came a voice of Montgomery behind the thicket. I was on a slope above the bushes. Montgomery and Moreau beat along the beach beneath. Slowly we pushed and among the fretted network of branches and leaves. The quarry was silent. Back on the house of pain, the house of pain, yelped a voice of the ape-man, some 20 yards to the right. When I heard that, I forgave the poor wretch and all the fear that had inspired me. I heard the twigs snap and the burrows swish aside and the heavy tread of the horse rhinoceros upon my right. Then suddenly, through a polygon of green and in half darkness under the luxuriant growth, I saw a creature we were hunting. I halted. He was crouched together into the smallest possible compass, his luminous green eyes turned over his shoulder regarding mine. It may seem strange contradiction in me. I cannot explain the fact, but now seeing the creature there perfectly in animal attitude, with light gleaming in his eyes and his imperfectly human face distorted with terror, I realized again that the fact of its humanity, and in another moment other of its pursuers would see it, and it would be overpowered and captured, to experience once more the horrible tortures of enclosure. Abruptly, I whipped out my revolver, aimed it between its terror-struck eyes, and fired. As I did so, the hyena swine saw the thing, and flung itself upon it with an eager cry, thrusting 30 feet into its neck. All about me, green masses of the thicket were swaying and cracking. The beast people and came rushing together. One face and another appeared. "Don't kill it, Prendrick," cried Moreau. "Don't kill it." I saw him stooping as he pushed through and under the fronds of the big ferns, and in another moment he had beaten off the hyena swine in the handle of his whip, and he had Montgomery were keeping away an excited carnivorous beast people, and particularly ling from the still quivering body. The hairy gray thing came sniffling at the corpse under my arm, and the other animals and in their animal ardor jostled me to get a nearer view. Confound you, Prendrick," said Moreau. "I wanted him." "I'm sorry," I said, though I was not. It was impulse of the moment. I felt sick with extortion and excitement. Turning, I pushed my way out of the crowding of the beast people and went alone up on the slope towards the higher part of the headland. Under the shouted directions of Moreau, I heard the 3 white-swathed bowmen begin dragging the victim down towards the water. It was easy now for me to be alone. The beast people manifested quite human curiosity about the dead body, and followed it in a thick knot, sniffing and growling at it as the bowmen dragged it down to the beach. I went to the headland and watched the bowmen, black against the evening sky, as they carried the weighted body out to sea. And like the wave across my mind, the realization of the unspeakable aimlessness of things upon the island. Upon the beach, among the rocks beneath me, were the ape men, the hyena and the hyena swine, the several other of the beast people, standing about Montgomery and Moreau. They were still intensely excited, and all overflowing with noisy expressions of their loyalty to the law. Yet I felt an absolute assurance in my own mind that the hyena swine was implicated in the rabbit killing. The strange persuasion came upon me that, save for the grossness of the line, the grotesque of its forms, had I before me the whole balance of human life in miniature, the whole interplay of instinct, reason, the fate of its simplest form. The leopard man had happened to go under. That was all the difference. Poor brute! Poor brutes! I began to see a viler aspect of Moreau's cruelty. I had not thought of the pain and trouble that came to these poor victims after they had passed Moreau's hands. I had shivered at only the days of actual torment in the enclosure, but now that seemed the lesser part. Before they had seen beasts, and their instincts fitly adapted to their surroundings, and happy livings things may be. Now they stumbled in the shackles of humanity, lived in fear that never died, fretted by a law they could not understand. Their mock human existence, begun in agony, was the only long internal struggle. One long dead Moreau. And for what? It was the wantonness of it that stirred me. Had Moreau had any intelligible object, I could have sympathized at least a little with him. I am not so squeamish about pain as that. I could have forgiven him even a little, and his motive had been only hate, but he was so irresponsible, so utterly careless. His curiosity, his mad, aimless investigations drove him on, and the things were thrown out to live a year or so, to struggle and blunder and suffer, and at last die painfully. They were wretched in themselves. The old animal they hate moved to trouble them another. The law of them back the brief hot struggle, the decisive end their natural animosities. In those days, my fear of the beast people went the way of my personal fear for Moreau. I fell indeed into a morbid state, deep and enduring, and alien to fear, which has left impermanent scars in my mind. I must confess that I have lost faith in the sanity of the world when I saw it suffering a painful disorder on this island. A blind fate, a vast pitiless mechanism, seemed to cut and shape the fabric of existence. And I, Moreau, by passion for his research, Montgomery, by passion for drink, and beast people with their instincts and mental restrictions were torn and crushed ruthlessly, inevitably, amid the infinite complexity of the insistent wheels. But this condition cannot come all at once. I think, I anticipate a little in speaking of it now. Chapter 17. A Catastrophe. Scarcely 6 weeks passed since before I had lost every feeling but dislike and abhorrence for the infamous experiment of Moreau's. One of my one idea was to get away from these horrible caricatures of my Maker's image, but back to the sweet and wholesome intercourse of men. My fellow creatures from whom I was thus separated began to assume idyllic virtue and beauty in my memory. My first friendship with Montgomery did not increase. His long separation from humanity, his secret vice of drunkenness, his evident sympathy for the beast people tainted him to me. Several times I let him go alone among them. I avoided intercourse with them in every possible way. I spent an increasing proportion of time upon the beach looking for some liberating sail that never appeared, until one day there fell upon us an appalling disaster, which put an altogether different aspect upon my strange surroundings. It was about 7 or 8 weeks after my landing. Rather more, I think, though I had not troubled to keep account of time, when this catastrophe occurred. It happened in the early morning, I think about 6. I had risen and breakfasted early, having been aroused by the noise of the 3 beast men carrying the wood into the enclosure. After breakfast, I went to open the gateway of the enclosure and stood there smoking a cigarette and enjoying the freshness of the early morning. Moreau presently came around the corner in the enclosure and greeted me. He passed by me and heard him behind me unlock and enter the laboratory. So indurated was I at the time of the abomination of the palace. I had heard without a touch of emotion of the puma victim begin another day of torture. It met its persecutor with a shriek, almost exactly like that of an angry virago. Then suddenly something happened. I do not know what. To this day, I heard a short, sharp cry behind me, a fall, and turning saw an awful face rushing upon me. Not a human, not animal, but hellish, brown, seemed to roll branching scars, red drops starting out upon it, the lidness of eyes ablaze. I threw up my arm and defended myself from the blow and flung me headlong in a broken forearm. And the great monster, swathed in lint and red-strained bandages fluttering about it, leapt over me and passed. I rolled over and over down the beach, tried to sit up, and collapsed upon my broken arm. Then Moreau appeared, his massive white face all the more terrible for blood that trickled on his forehead. He carried a revolver in one hand and scarcely glanced at me, and rushed off in pursuit of the puma. I tried in the other arm and sat up. The muffled figure in front of the ran in great striding leaps along the beach, and Moreau followed her. She turned her head and saw him, and doubling abruptly made for the bushes. She gained upon him at every stride, and saw every plunge into them, and Moreau, running slantingly to intercept her, fired and missed as she disappeared. Then he too vanished in the green confusion. I stared after them, and then the pain in my arm flamed up. With a groan I staggered to my feet. Montgomery appeared in the doorway, dressed, and was his revolver in hand. "Great God, Pendrick," he said, not noticing I was hurt. "That brute's loose! Tore the fetter out of the wall. Have you seen them?" And then sharply, seeing I gripped my arm, "What's the matter?" "I was standing in the doorway," I said. He came forward and took my arm. "Blood on the sleeve," he said, and rolled back the flannel. He pocketed his weapon, felt my arm painfully, and led me inside. "Your arm is broken," he said, and then, "Tell me exactly how it happened. What happened?" I told him what I had seen, told him the broken sentences with gaps of pain in between them, very dexterously and swiftly bound my arm meanwhile. He slung it from my shoulder, stood back and looked at me. "You'll do," he said. "And now?" He thought, and he went out and locked the gates of his enclosure. He was absent some time. He was chiefly concerned about my arm. The incident seemed merely more than many horrible things. He sat down in a deck chair, and I must admit I swore heartily on that island. The first dull feeling of injury in my arm had already given way in the burning pain when Montgomery reappeared, his face rather pale, and showed more of his lower gums than ever. "I can neither see nor hear anything of him," he said. "I've been thinking he may want my help." He started at me with his expressionless eyes. "That was a strong brute," he said. "It simply wrenched its fetter out of the wall." He went out to the window, then to the door, then he turned to me. "I shall go after him," he said. "There's another revolver I can leave with you. To tell you the truth, I feel anxious somehow." He obtained the weapon, I put it ready to my hand on the table, then went out, leaving a restless contagion of air. I did not sit long after he left, but took a revolver in his hand and went to the doorway. The morning was still as death, though not a whisper of wind was stirring, and the sea was like a polished glass, the sky empty, and the beach desolate. In my half-excited, half-feverish state, this stillness of things oppressed me. I tried to whistle, and the tune died away. I swore again, the second time that morning. Then I went to the corner of the enclosure and stared inland at the green bush and swallowed up Moreau and Montgomery. When would they return, and how? Then fear up away the beach, and little gray beast man appeared, ran down the water's edge, and began splashing about. I strolled back to the doorway, then to the corner again, and so back began pacing to and fro like a sentinel upon duty. Once I rested by the distant voice of Montgomery bawling, "Corrie, Moreau!" My arm began less painful, but very hot. I got feverish and thirsty. My shadow grew shorter. I watched the distant figure until it went away again. Would Moreau and Montgomery never return? The three seabirds began fighting for some standard treasure. Then, from far away behind the enclosure, I heard a pistol shot. The long silence, and came another. Then a yelling cry nearer, and then a dismal gap of silence. My unfortunate imagination set to work to torment me. Then suddenly a shot close by. I went to the corner and startled. Saw Montgomery, his face scarlet, his hair disordered, and the knee of his trousers torn. His face expressed profound consternation. Behind him slouched the beast-man Maling, and round Maling's jaws were some queer dark stains. "Has he come?" said Montgomery. "Moreau?" "No," I said. My God, the man was panting, almost sobbing. "Go back in," he said, taking my arm. "They're mad. They're all rushing about mad. What could have happened? I don't know. I'll tell you when my breath comes. Where is some brandy?" Montgomery leapt before me into a room that sat down into the deck chair. Molly flung himself down just outside the doorway and began panting like a dog. I got Montgomery some brandy and water. He sat staring in front of him at nothing, recovering his breath. After some minutes, began to tell me of what happened. He had followed their track for some way. It was plain enough at first, an account of which was crushed in broken bushes, white rags torn from the puma's bandages, and occasional smears of blood at leaves of the shrub's undergrowth. He lost the track, however, the stony ground beyond the stream where I had have seen the beast man drinking, and went and wandering the sea aimlessly westward, shouting Moreau's name. Then Maling had come to him, but carrying the light hatchet. Maling had seen nothing but of the puma affair, had been felling wood, and heard him calling. They went on shouting together. Two beast men came crouching and peering at them through the undergrowth. The gestures and furtive carriage that alarmed Montgomery by their strangeness, he hailed them, and fled guilty. He stopped shouting after that, and after wandering some time after an undecided way, determined to visit the huts. He found a ravine deserted. Growing more alarmed every minute, he began to retrace his steps. Then it was he who encountered the two swine men. Then I had seen them dancing the night of my arrival. Blood-stained they were about the mouth, intensely excited. They came crashing through the ferns and stopped with fierce faces when they saw him. He cracked his whip in the repetition. And forthwith they rushed him. Never before had a beast man dared to do that. One shot through the head, Maling flung himself upon the other, and the two rolled grappling. Maling got the brute under his, and with his teeth in the throat, and Montgomery shot in that too, and as it struggled with Maling's grip. He had some difficulty in inducing Maling to come with him. Thence they had hurried back to me. On the way, Maling had suddenly rushed back into the thicket and driven under the sized ocelot man, also bloodstained and lame through a wound in the foot. This brute had run a little way and then turned savagely at the bay. Then Montgomery, with certain wantonness, I thought, had shot him. "What does it all mean?" I said. He shook his head and turned once more to the brandy. Chapter 18. The Finding of Moreau. When I saw Montgomery swallow the third dose of brandy, I took it upon myself to interfere. He was already more than half fuddled. I told him that some serious thing might have happened to Moreau by this time, or he would have returned before this, and that it behoved us to ascertain what that catastrophe was. Montgomery raised some feeble objections, at last agreed. We had some food, and then all three of us started. It is possibly due to the tension of my mind at this time, but even now to start the hot stillness of the tropical afternoon in a singularly vivid impression, Maling went first, his shoulder hunched, his strange black head moving with a quick start as he peered first on his side, of the way on then that. He was unarmed, his axe, and he had dropped when he had encountered the swine man. Teeth were his weapons. When he came fighting, Montgomery followed with his stumbling footsteps, his hands in his pockets, his face downcast. He was in a state of muddled stillness with me on account of brandy. My left arm was in a sling. It was lucky it was my left, and carried my revolver in my right. Soon we traced a narrow path through the wild luxuriance of the island, going northwestward, and presently Maling stopped, and became rigid with watchfulness. Montgomery almost staggered into him, and then stopped too. Then, listening inherently, we heard coming through the trees and sound voices of footsteps approaching us. "He is dead," said a deep, vibrating voice. "He is not dead. He is not dead," jabbered another. We saw, said several voices. "Hello," shouted Montgomery. "Hello there." "Confound you," I said, and gripped my pistol. There was a silence, then a crashing among the interlacing vegetation. First here, then there, then a half a dozen faces appeared, strange faces lit by strange light. Maling made a growling noise in his throat. I recognized the ape-man, and I had indeed already identified his voice, and two white, swathed, brown featured creatures I had seen in Montgomery's boat. With these were two dappled brutes, that gray, horribly choked creature who said in the law, the gray hair streaming down cheeks, heavy gray eyebrows, gray locks pouring off the central parting upon the sloping forehead, a heavy, faceless thing, red with strange red eyes, looking at us curiously from midst of the green. For a space, no one spoke. Then Montgomery hiccuped. He said he was dead. The monkey man looked guilty at the hairy gray thing. "He is dead," said this monster. They saw. There was nothing threatening about this detachment. At any rate, they seemed awe-stricken and puzzled. "Where is he?" said Montgomery. "Beyond." And the gray creature pointed. "Is there a law now?" asked the monkey man. "Is it still to be this and that? And is he dead indeed?" "Is there a law?" repeated the man in white. "Is there a law, thou other with the whip?" "He is dead," said the hairy gray thing, and they all stood watching us. "Prendrick," said Montgomery, turning his dull eyes to me. "He's dead, evidently." I had been standing behind him during the colloquy. I began to see how things lay with him. Suddenly stepped toward front of Montgomery and lifted my voice. "Children of the law," I said, "he is not dead." Maling turned his sharp eyes on me. He changed his shape. He changed his body. I went on. "For a time you will not see him. He is there." I pointed upward, there, where he can watch you. "You cannot see him, but he can see you. Fear the law." I looked at them squarely. They flinched. "He is great. He is good," said the ape-man, peering fearfully upward among the dense trees. "And the other thing?" I demanded. "The thing that bled, and ran screaming and sobbing. That is dead too." "That," said the gray thing, still regarding me. "That's well," grunted Montgomery. "The other with the whip," began the gray thing. "Well," I said he was dead. But Montgomery was still sober enough to understand my motive in denying Moreau's death. "He is not dead," he said slowly. not dead at all. No more dead than I am. Some, I said, have broken the law. They will die. Some have died. Show us now where his body lies. The body he cast away because he had no more need of it. It is this way, man who walked in the sea, said the gray thing. And with these 6 creatures guiding us, we went through the tumult of ferns and creepers and tree sterns toward the northwest. And then came a yelling, a crashing among the branches, and little pink homunculus rushed by the shrieking. Immediately after appeared a monster of headlong pursuit, blood bedabbled, who amongst could almost before he could stop his career. The gray thing leapt aside. Mling with a snarl flew at it, and struck aside. Montgomery fired and missed, bowed his head, threw his arm up, and turned to run. I fired, and the thing still came on. Fired again, point blank, into his ugly face. I saw its features vanish in a flash. Its face was driven in, yet it passed me, gripped Montgomery, holding him, fell headlong beside him, and pulled him sprawling upon itself in its death agony. I found myself alone with Maling, the dead brute, and the prostrate man. Montgomery raised himself slowly and stared in the muddled way in the shattered beast man beside him. It more than half sobered him. He scrambled to his feet. Then I saw the gray thing returning cautiously through the trees. "See," I said, pointing to the dead brute, "is the law not alive? This came from the breaking of the law." He peered at the body. He sends the fire that kills," he said in the deep voice, repeating the part of the ritual. The others gathered round and started for a space. At last we drew near the westward extremity of the island. We came upon the gnawed, mutilated body of the puma, its shoulder bone smashed by the bullet, and perhaps 20 yards further found at last what we sought. Moreau lay face downward at the trampled space in the canebrake. One hand was almost severed at the wrist, and with silvery hair was dabbled in blood. His head had been battered by the fetters of the puma, and broken canes beneath him had smeared with blood. His revolver we could not find. Montgomery turned him over, resting at intervals, and help of the 7 beast people, for he was a heavy man. He carried Moreau back to the enclosure. The night was darkening. Twice and we heard unseen creatures howling and shrieking our past brand. And once a little pink sloth creature appeared and stared at us, vanished again, but we were not attacked again. At gates of the enclosure, our company of beast people left us, Maling going with the rest. We locked ourselves in, and then took Moreau's mangled body to the yard and lay it upon a pile of brushwood. And then we went to the laboratory and put an end to what we have found living here.